Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. It is great to have your company here on the Erin Molan Show, wherever you are around the world. What a huge 24 hours. There is so much to get into, and I want to get you across all of the day's headlines as well, of course, in America and globally. Plus, bring you my very special guest for today, David Keyes. So he was a former spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Also someone who has written multiple speeches for world leaders at the United Nations. And the United Nations has just dominated the newsfeed over the past, particularly 48 to 72 hours. But Donald Trump's speech, one for the ages. One for the ages. He is next level. He is redefining what it means to be a courageous world leader. You don't need polish, you don't need perfection, you need guts, you need truth, and you need a little bit of chutzpah. And he has got that in spades. Have a little listen to just this bit, then I'll go into it in more detail with David a little bit later on in the show. But this was, I said you don't need perfection. In my humble opinion, this was pure perfection.
It's too bad that I had to do these things instead of the United Nations doing them. And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them. I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen. But she's in great shape. We're both in good shape. We both stood. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much. And by the way, it's working now. It just went on. Thank you. I think I should just do it the other way. It's easier. Thank you very much. I didn't think of it at the time because I was too busy working to save millions of lives. That is the saving and stopping of these wars. But later I realized that the United Nations wasn't there for us. They weren't there. I thought of it really after the fact, not during these negotiations, which were not easy. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
He is unlike anything we have ever seen before. That takes guts to say that right to their faces. It wasn't just down the barrel of a camera. It wasn't in another room. They were all sitting there, having to watch, do that nodding type thing. That is brilliant, utterly brilliant. So we'll go into more detail about how those kind of things are constructed, the speeches I'm talking about, and what is the meaning behind a lot of the different segments in there. We'll break it all down for you as well and talk about a big national security threat as well that was discovered and killed off essentially prior to this United Nations meeting in New York. But let me get you across the rest of the day's headlines. And US President has also held meetings, a whole series of them, with world leaders, including with Ukrainian President Zelensky, where he was asked this by a journalist and responded. Have a listen.
Do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Unbelievable, huh? He is sick to death of Putin, and he continually references that and alludes to that as well over recent days. Very much so. You can tell he's completely run out of patience. He keeps saying, I thought the Ukrainian-Russian war would be the easiest to solve because of my great relationship with Vladimir Putin. He clearly feels incredibly let down, possibly betrayed by Putin. Donald Trump thought this would be a much more simple process with him involved. Obviously, they met now, it was nearly a month ago. Nothing has happened since. The US has cracked down more. The US is applying pressure, but Putin does not seem to be doing one thing. Not one. And I'm not saying that Ukraine are perfect in this space, but in my humble opinion, the onus is on Russia. And Trump clearly is losing patience. Now, our favourite, Kamala Harris, she continues her book tour. I spoke to you about this yesterday. Now, the latest stop, now, shock you, shock me. She went on The View. Of course she did. Now, listen to her response to this question from Joy. Yeah, they actually asked her fairly well. I mean, it's an obvious question, but to Joy's credit, and I didn't think I'd ever say those words, to Joy's credit, she persisted and Kamala was forced into a little bit of a corner. Have a listen to how she handled this.
Will you run again? Will you run again?
Going forward,
will you run
that's
again?
what,
You'd like to run again?
that's not in my immediate focus.
Right.
I'm doing my book tour. And please, everybody, come out. I'm going to a lot of cities.
Now, there is no way in hell, ladies and gentlemen, no way in hell she is not running again. No way in hell. Every single thing she's doing now is with 2028 in mind. No doubt about it. And that moment there is when I knew. I'd suspected, but then I thought she couldn't be that stupid. No, she couldn't be that much of a sucker for punishment. She couldn't really want to fail again on the world stage. No, but yes, 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 she does. And this is the moment that is now set in stone. Wow. At least it will be content. Content, content. Her back on the campaign trail. I mean, that's if the Democrats are stupid enough to put her in there, because we know how she generally goes when it comes to actually having to do it the proper way and not just being handed the nomination. It will be fascinating regardless. Cannot wait. Now, the potential next actual president, not the Fantasyland one, J.D. Vance, just did something, well, as close to greatness as you can get. He was with Defence Secretary Pete Hegsseth. To be honest, the two of them together, it was just a brief moment. But in my mind, it says to me, J.D. Vance is ready for the top job. The two were walking out of the Union Station in D.C., lefty lunatics shouting at them just for something new. I mean, they're so creative. And their reaction, well, take a look. And if you're listening to the podcast, I'll describe it in a second. But just have a quick look at how these two, J.D. Vance and Pete Hegsseth, the Defence Secretary, handled these nut cases.
I heard you, buddy. This is the guy who thinks people don't deserve law and order in their own community.
Mr. Vice President, how did it go?
Hey guys, thank you.
So yes, they pointed and laughed. Yes, thank you. It was like when Tom Holman walked past and just ate an apple as they were screaming blue murder at him. And he just ate his apple. And it was, well, it could now be the second greatest, but it could rival this for the greatest, because there's also something wonderful about just completely ignoring them, eating an apple. But this was so good. They pointed and they laughed. This is how you handle these kinds of people. They're not legitimate, passionate pioneers of causes that are worthy. No. They're douchebags who stand for nothing. They fight for failure. And instead of changing hearts and minds, they end up just looking completely and utterly ridiculous. Again, a reminder to all those who are sane in the world and who are targeted by these nincompoops. Handle it this way. Eat an apple or laugh at them. That's it. They're your two choices. You're welcome. Now, singer Pink has apparently deleted a social media post suggesting Pop Goes the Weasel should be played at Charlie Kirk's funeral. Now, if that is the case, not only is that completely disgusting, and I don't need to explain to you guys why, because the fact you're watching this show shows that you would have some understanding of why that is completely deplorable, but this is the same woman who preaches kindness and acceptance and girl power and being who you are and owning your flaws and your different traits in every bloody song she sings. She gets up at award shows and pretends to care deeply about the feelings of others and celebrating differences and telling her daughter that it's okay not to be like everyone else and to not feel like you fit in. Have a listen. Have a look at this.
On a PowerPoint presentation of androgynous rock stars that live their truth. And assured Willow she's dealt with similar criticism.
Complete hypocrite. Sorry, Pink, but you have lost every right you ever had to preach anything that is meaningful ever again. Ever again. You can never, ever try to convince people to be accepting and to be kind and to be yourself. If someone who is doing exactly those things, being themselves, maybe being a little bit different to you, in his own way, being incredibly kind, and you think Pop Goes the Weasel is an appropriate song for the funeral of a father and a husband, a human being, never again. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to dig deep into Trump's speech at the United Nations because I loved every single second of it. Every second. Some of it was pre-prepared and written, brilliantly done so. A lot of it, like in Trump's normal style, was off the cuff. David Keyes is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He was Netanyahu's former spokesperson. He does a lot of speech writing. He's written a lot of speeches for leaders at the United Nations. So I wanted to get his take on this. David Keyes, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You have written many United Nations speeches in your time, potentially still in that game, but unconfirmed. You were also the former spokesperson for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You know this space well. I want you to rate for me Donald Trump's speech at the United Nations. Have you ever seen anything like it?
It was definitely a one-of-a-kind speech. I've been in that hall many times, and indeed have written many a UN speech, and that was completely unique. What I liked about it was that he spoke truth to power, and he said it the way it really is. You know, he called them out for their failings, and people just don't do that in front of the United Nations. It's such a supposedly august body, and it's full of pomp and pomposity. But he stood up there and just kind of punctured the lies. He says, as I was solving wars around the world, I didn't even get a call from the United Nations. And that's exactly the problem, because it's comprised of the very dictators that are launching the wars. And dictators and democracies are treated exactly the same. So it was an unforgettable speech on many levels. I understand not everybody loved it, but it certainly was a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, you're so right regarding most people in power's inability to express how they really feel, particularly in front of the target of those feelings. But he gives no Fs, essentially, about any of that. He'll do it in the Oval Office with the leader of a nation right next to him and play a video that he hasn't told him about and embarrass him in front of the whole world, but always for legitimate reasons, not because it's fun, but because they wholeheartedly deserve it.
Yeah, he's also communicating in a very modern style. He's going direct to the people. He's being funny. He's being sarcastic. He's making fun of the broken escalator and the broken teleprompter. He's making people laugh. He's unafraid to sort of challenge the status quo of how a supposedly serious speech should be. And that's, I think, why it resonates. That's why it goes viral. That's why a lot of people enjoy it, because it's much more human than the stodgy, old school, stiff, dear distinguished delegates, blah, 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 blah. And there's hundreds of world leaders that get up there, and it's completely forgettable. It goes in one ear, out the other, and they droll on and on and on and on. And so that's what you need in order to be recognized, in order to go viral these days, in order to break through the cacophony of all the other noise and really reach people. So that's what he did very, very well.
You know the UN space very well, and he then goes on to talk a little bit about his offer to redo it and to do it properly, and I'll play a little bit of that in a second. But I want to talk about the escalator and the auto cue. I am not a conspiracy theorist in any way, shape or form, but don't you look me in the eye and tell me that wasn't intentional. There is no way in hell the second Melania steps on that escalator that it stops, and there's no way in hell that the second Trump gets up to that podium that the auto cue breaks. Like, come on.
Well, I can tell you it was not the Mossad. That much I know. Yeah, look, that's a lot of strange coincidences. The Jews did not do it. Of that I'm sure. It was a little bit weird, and perhaps people are trying to troll him back. He's such an effective troller that they're trying to fight trolling with trolling. But he is the CTO, the Chief Troll Officer, so you can't really outdo him even if you try. And he dealt with it very well. He made light of it. He made it lighthearted. He was a little self-deprecating. That conveys great confidence. So that worked. But certainly, if I was a world leader, I would be looking around to make sure everything really works and you've double-checked everything before you go up. But perhaps there's deep-seated animosity within the deep state of the United Nations, which is a highly corrupt and morally imbecilic organization in the extreme.
It really, it is so farcical. And I was laughing earlier thinking about the fact that they clearly detest him because he stands for the opposite of everything they do, which is peace, freedom, democracy, all the things that are good in the world. If they hated him enough to break the escalator and the auto cue prior to his arrival, imagine how they feel about him after that speech to their face.
Look, it takes a lot of confidence to go into that hall and speak the way he did, and he's pointing out simple truths. But as Orwell said, what is hardest to see is that which is directly in front of your face. And the United Nations is just a hall of lies. It's filled with dictators and tin pot tyrants who like to pontificate with great ceremony. But it's a fundamentally corrupt organization. It deserves to be called out. It doesn't do much good for the world. In fact, quite the opposite, because it elevates the status of these tyrants, and it treats democracies and dictatorships absolutely identical. So it's no surprise that when the bodies are comprised of such corrupt and repressive states, that they go after democracies like Israel and don't have much time for the actual mass murdering, genocidal terrorists and dictators of the world. So it's really
You're absolutely right.
The hen house.
They need to defund the entire thing. It is completely useless except to help the reign of terror. And this is a thing that frustrates me to no end, because unless you are engaged in this, unless you follow it to the extent that you do, to the extent that I do, but most normal people, it feels far away to them, and they think in their mind the United Nations, oh, that's an amazing organization that just wants peace in the world and that does good. You know, people will say to me often, yeah, but Erin, the United Nations said this. Like I get what you're saying, but the United Nations, as though it's a body that demands and deserves respect, it's the complete opposite. It's gone downhill at a pace unlike anything we've seen before, to use a phrase that Trump uses often.
Yeah, absolutely. And they treat Israel like they beat up Israel because they can, because they're too busy, finding every fault with the one open liberal democracy in the Middle East, and the Uyghurs in China, or Russian plots around the world, or mass murder in Syria gets barely a mention. And when you tally up the numbers, it's obscene. So there needs to be a fundamental rethink of what this body is, because it has all the trappings, outer trappings of legitimacy. And you're right, it convinces people to have decent branding. You hear the United Nations and you think, that is international legitimacy. But it's absolutely a joke. It's absolutely a joke. And all you have to do is watch these dictators from Qatar and all sorts of other places get up and speak as if they are paragons of virtue and peace, and no one calls them out. The president did today, not Qatar specifically, but really reset the moral framework of what should be focused on at a body like the United Nations.
David, I want to play this part where Donald Trump talks about Israel on October 7, and he specifically calls out, as they sit there in that room, the weak leaders, including Macron, Starmer, Carney, Albanese, who have attempted to appease domestic interests and Muslim voters, essentially, by recognising a Palestinian state, doing nothing to help anyone in Palestine, let alone anyone in the rest of the world. Have a listen to this.
We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Instead of giving to Hamas and giving so much, because they've taken so much, this could have been solved so long ago. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now.
Now, this must be the first time at the United Nations that somebody has mentioned the hostages. I mean, I know that Israel has, and there are, lone wolves around who actually think that's worth talking about because potentially that could be a human rights issue. The vast majority of them, not so much. But how is it so hard for people in that organisation to jump behind something that should unify everyone? That should not be controversial to call for the release of hostages.
Well, it's in part due to the makeup of the body. When you have countries like Iraq that were heading the Disarmament Committee and Libya and Iran on human rights committees, the whole thing is an absolute farce. So it doesn't
Afghanistan
surprise
on the
me.
Women's Rights Committee.
It's just a joke. It's just an absolute joke. But European countries, which should be, screaming, bloody murder over this, and they should be highlighting the monstrosity that was October 7th and the remaining hostages, perhaps they're a little bit too busy with problems in their own backyard. Perhaps they identify with those who took the hostages a little bit too much, but it's outrageous. Everyone in the world should be calling to free the hostages immediately. And Hamas, these absolute barbarians who slaughtered 1,200 people in a single day and took over 250 hostages and still maintain control of some part of Gaza, and every single day are torturing these innocent people, and they're in these dark dungeons, unable to move, haven't seen light, haven't showered, haven't gotten medicine, haven't had access to the Red Cross or their families or anything of the sort. It's an absolute despicable monstrosity, and anybody who doesn't call them out should be called out themselves for their lack of moral clarity, because with enough pressure and constant pressure from every single state that is backing Hamas, like Qatar, the hostages could have been out a long time ago. But Israel, I do not think, will relent even for 1 second. It will go to the ends of the earth to get these people back, and that's what they should do, because they are civilians and they did absolutely nothing wrong on that day. So shame on the UN for saying basically nothing about this critical issue.
Absolutely. And they're not alone in their complete hypocrisy and their abhorrent failure when it comes to one of the biggest human rights issues that we face at the moment, which is that situation. Not so much the starvation in Gaza, because that's been debunked many, many times. Yes, there is suffering, but the hostages, who are without any doubt evidentiary-based, suffering horrendously. You look at the Red Cross, you look at UNICEF, all these other organisations. I did a search a few months ago of their X accounts to look at how many times they had mentioned the hostages as these kind of, organisations that are supposed to care deeply about the welfare of all, particularly innocent people. It was almost non-existent, David. So the UN isn't alone in this, are they?
No, and in fact, for years, the UN worked side by side with Hamas in Gaza. So they have no moral authority whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they've been on the wrong side of just about every issue and created a total moral equivalence between those who attacked and those who were attacked, those who are terrorists and those who are liberal democracies. And so they have no authority whatsoever to speak on this, and they've been complicit in this to a large degree. The UNRWA schools in Gaza were feeding daily hate and Jew hatred of the worst sort, prepping kids to be suicide bombers to go out and stab Jews or kill Jews or blow up Jews. And these were UN curriculums by UN staff, and they were completely infiltrated by Hamas. And all the aid that was brought in was used by this terror organization to wage war against Israel. The water pipes were cut up into rocket launchers. All the flour, all the cement, everything was marshaled for war. So the only right policy is total victory over Hamas. And anyone who stands in the way of that total victory is, frankly, an enemy of peace. And anybody who favors it is a friend of peace.
Brilliantly put. Nothing less must be accepted by anyone. And it is not a right of Israel to do that. It is a duty and an obligation. On behalf of their own people, the rest of the West will just benefit from it.
Absolutely. It's a moral duty.
I want to give a quick shout out now, 100%, to a couple of outstanding members of the international community. Giorgia Meloni, despite the riots and the disgusting behaviour of mobs in Italy at the moment, she has refused to bow down to these terrorists and to do the wrong thing. And that it shouldn't require courage, because it's just the right thing to do. But in this day and age, it does.
Look, there's a handful of people who are outwardly supportive of Israel. Milei comes to mind, who takes a very brave stand as well.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, I've been in a lot of meetings with world leaders in my years serving as the prime minister's spokesman. And often there's a lot of praise for Israel behind closed doors. They're not quite brave enough to say it in public, but behind closed doors, let me tell you, they want Israel's intelligence. They want Israel's technology. They want Israel's ingenuity. And they are deeply, deeply desirous of deeper connections, cooperations, and help from Israel because they know that Israel has many of the tools that can improve the lives of their citizens. So enough hypocrisy. Let's say it publicly and clearly and loudly and without fear. And kudos to those leaders who do it.
That is a great segue into the next point I wanted to make. And I lived in Indonesia for 7 years growing up. So I speak the language fluently, very passionate about the people, the country, the culture. The new President Prabowo spoke at the United Nations. And look, I haven't been overly impressed with the rhetoric from Indonesia since October 7. I think as the country with the world's largest Islamic population, they could have used their voice in such a more powerful way for good. But the closed door thing is key. I was in Indonesia just a few months ago and I had some very high level meetings, and I can tell you hand on heart, the support for Israel privately in that country is significantly higher than it is from a public perspective. And they, and I quote, "We hate Islamic extremism more than they do." And I believe them. And Indonesia over the past, say, 2 decades has done an incredible job of getting it out of their country in a large way. Not entirely, that's impossible, but in a large way. They get it. They've experienced it. They hate it. And I got some real hope from the president of Indonesia today. Yes, he said some things that I disagree with, but he then said we must recognize Israel. And that was brave, because the vast majority of his people probably don't feel that way. Let's play it now, and then I want to get your opinion on it.
We must also recognize, we must also respect, and we must also guarantee the safety and security of Israel. Only then we can have real peace. Real peace. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom.
That to me is a big deal, David, a big deal.
It is a big deal. And I think it's also a testament to the victories that Israel has accrued over the last year or two, because everybody loves a winner. Osama bin Laden said that people go with the strong horse. And Israel today is a strong horse. It's decimated Hezbollah. It paged Hezbollah and everyone dropped to the floor. It decimated the Houthis, destroyed half their government. It took out Iran's nuclear facilities with President Trump's help. It kicked Iran out of Syria. Assad has fallen. Everywhere you look in the Middle East, Israel has kicked ass and taken names. And so around the world, people respect that. And they see that Israel is once again winning in decisive ways, really across the region. And it's doing things that no one else can do. And the enemies that we fight are the exact same enemies of all civilized countries. These people who shout death to America and death to Israel and death to the West and death to infidels, those are the enemies that also strike democracies around the world. And Israel has prevented attacks in, I don't know, just about every country in Europe, and certainly Australia, the downing of a jet almost. It has, prevented attacks all over the world because it has phenomenal intelligence. So this is not some provincial struggle that Israel is, alone being attacked by these terrorists. No, Israel is leading the charge to defeat the enemies of Western civilization. So those who help us are helping themselves, and those who don't help Israel are really just shooting themselves in the foot, and they're making a tragic and terrible mistake.
Does Israel need to stop being apologetic or stop trying to get people they need to just write off, to like them, support them, accept them?
Well, it's always good to have allies, and Israel, of course, needs to make its case persuasively around the world, but it also has to do whatever it has to do, even without the support of others. So Israel is fighting alone sometimes. It will fight with its fingernails if it needs to. It doesn't need the approval of anyone else to defend our families. Full stop. So if people have a problem with the fact that Israel is still fighting Hamas, too damn bad. We need to fight until absolute victory. And that was the position of great democracies in the past, like the United States, like Great Britain, when they were faced with tremendous threats and world wars, they decided immediately that total victory would be the policy. And so if part of the world doesn't like that, I'm sorry, but we have to win. We have to protect our families. We have to defeat these barbarians, because if they survive, they will do ever worse damage against Israel and against democracies across the entire world.
You know Benjamin Netanyahu very well, I'm assuming, given your former role. Is he the right man to lead this right now?
Well, he's done some absolutely tremendous things over the past 2 years, and he deserves a lot of credit because he single-handedly took out Iran's nuclear program. Of course, President Trump came in at the end and helped destroy Fordo, which I believe saved millions of lives. But in taking the fight to the enemy, he's done something incredibly important and incredibly bold. Of course, October 7th was a tremendous tragedy and a tremendous failure across the board. But sometimes tragedies can be catalysts for great victories, just as Pearl Harbor was, just as September 11th was. And so this is a war that's going to be fought for a long time. It's going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to require tremendous sacrifices, and it needs leaders who are willing to sometimes shut out the criticism of those around him in order to pursue victory. And that's a very hard thing. I don't envy anyone in that position. And I've been, in years past, many, many hours with the Prime Minister, seeing him make very difficult calls. And I don't think people really appreciate the nuance and the difficulty and the pressure. 1,000 crises a day come across his desk. And he alone, together with the war cabinet, but has to make tremendous decisions about life and death on a daily basis. And in the Twitter age and the X age, where people can flippantly sit around and criticize everything, I recommend a little bit more humility in what people think they know and in the confidence they have in their views about what is being done at the highest levels of power.
I think that's a really clever way of putting it, the confidence in their views. It's not even that they spout sometimes just rubbish. It's the confidence that seems to back it up from people with zero substance, credibility, qualifications, and in the most part, knowledge. But you're right, they do it so confidently. I'd love their confidence.
Absolutely. People who have never spent a day in the military, people who have never seen what it's like to live in the Middle East, people who have no idea what it's like to be in power and to make life and death decisions every day, just flippantly every day, confidently saying this should be done, that should be done. These are very, very hard things, and impossible compromises need to be made sometimes. And we're fighting a 7-front war, for crying out loud. Who among us can confidently say that they can lead a 7-front war and know just what to do at all times? Mistakes are made, and that's part of human nature. And even in great and just wars, tremendous mistakes have been made in the past. So we need to understand the context of what's happening. And the context is that Israel is leading the fight against Islamic fundamentalism and jihadist terror around the world. And it is having tremendous successes, albeit the work is not fully done. This will take time. It will require sacrifices. But every great cause does. And I believe that Israel can win, must win, should win. And the fate of our very nation is on the line.
It reminds me of something General Petraeus said to me maybe a month ago when I had him on the show, and I made the point to him that you can defend Israel's absolute, not just right, but duty to carry out this war. It is absolutely a just war, but that doesn't mean there won't be mistakes, as you just said. And he made the point, and he's been quite critical of different elements of this war. He made the point that in the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq, he said it took them 10 years essentially, or 7 years, to come up with the right strategy, let alone to then execute it. People are insane when it comes to their expectation of perfection, particularly against an enemy that is unlike any enemy. He said, David Petraeus, former head of the CIA, ran the war in Iraq, and he made the point that the enemy in Gaza is far more complex than anything they faced.
Yeah, it's a unique situation. I mean, they're fundamentalists to a degree that most people in the West cannot understand. They don't understand what it's like to want all your kids to go and die in the name of Allah and to kill as many Jews as possible. That's hard to fathom. They don't understand what it's like to have hundreds of miles of tunnels, that your entire existence is dedicated to annihilating another state. These ideas don't comport with the Western mindset that is all about compromise and modernity and civility and reasonableness. discourse and debate, that is not what rules Gaza today. And so we have to understand their mentality. We have to understand the problem. We all have to learn Arabic, speak Arabic. We have to immerse ourselves in Islam, in the Quran, in the Hadith, and in the Surah. We have to listen to what they say to their own people, not just the bullshit they spread when they're talking to gullible Westerners in five-star hotels, and say, yeah, we might be thinking about a change, et cetera, et cetera. That's nonsense. And they lied through their teeth to the world, but they told the truth in Arabic to their own people. So it takes a very, very keen mind and a willingness to inhabit the psyche of your enemy on the deepest level to understand what animates them and therefore what will defeat them. And it will take time. People expect immediate results, I think, because everything is attainable today in a click of a button. But if you're trying to destroy a fundamentalist, jihadist, terrorist organization that's been embedded for 2 decades underground and in every facet of life, and they're ruthless and they're absolutely committed to their goals, it takes time and is very difficult and requires tremendous sacrifice. So I would encourage everyone to understand that and support Israel in this long and just war to defend our homeland.
Last question. Prime Minister Netanyahu is speaking at the UN in a couple of days in New York. Now, a report from the Secret Service has come out, and the headline of this essentially media release that they've put out, US Secret Service dismantles imminent telecommunications threat in New York tri-state area. Now, I'll put a link to this. It's worth going in and reading the exact detail, but this is utterly terrifying. And I think most people in the world now realize that warfare doesn't look the way it used to look 60, 100, even 20 years ago. Now, the capability when it comes to cyber, 300 co-located SIM servers, 100,000 SIM cards. And you know the players that will have been involved, Russia, the Chinese Communist Party, Qatar, Iran. This is terrifying, but congratulations to the Secret Service for identifying this and getting rid of the risk and the threat prior to all the world leaders being in one place.
Well, no doubt the nature of warfare is changing dramatically and very quickly. And we've seen kinetic attacks. Iran sponsored 2 attempted assassination attempts against President Trump. We saw the tragedy that happened to Charlie Kirk from a gunman. But in addition to those more traditional threats, the advent of drone swarms is going to be incredibly dangerous for humanity. We saw the first inklings of it in Ukraine and Russia, but I think that's going to become standard. Cyber attacks that cripple critical infrastructure, the ability to infiltrate anything with a battery or anything with a Wi-Fi connection. China has supreme dominance in this domain, and I think people are generally completely unaware of just how dangerous these regimes are. And so we have to understand their capabilities, build better capabilities than they have, build better technology, better AI, of course, defend ourselves. But things are about to get very, very weird and dangerous in the very near future with the fusion of AI and drones and robots and hacking. And it will be unlike anything the world has ever seen. So buckle up.
Utterly terrifying. And it's not just their ability to try and tap in, when it comes to national secrets and getting access to information. It's this mass propaganda messaging campaigns, these fake social media accounts that make it look like tens of thousands of people are pushing a narrative, which then gives it weight in the minds of those who are consuming it and thinking, oh, it must be true. So many different people are saying the same thing. They're not. It's a foreign actor maliciously overwhelming the market with fake messaging and with evil narratives.
Look, I was, the Prime Minister's, head of international communications, and so I was sort of at the forefront of this fight. There is a pitched narrative battle happening every single day between the Western world and the rest, between the civilized world and the rest, between the dictators and the democracies, China and what it's done through TikTok. It's effectively mind control. It's able to sow doubt and undermine democracies left, right, and center. It's capable of persuading the masses. And when you combine the science of persuasion with the ability to spin up accounts and to understand what animates people's minds through an all-powerful algorithm that the entirety of youth, it seems, spends all day swiping on, you have achieved a sort of dominance over the minds of men that tyrants in the past couldn't have even fathomed. And so we are fighting with one hand behind our back, both because we adhere to democratic norms and because we are unwilling to do generally what our enemies are doing. But we dither at our peril because they are taking the offense, and in many ways they're winning the narrative war. And we need to build better technology and have better messaging than our enemies, because everything is on the line. And kinetic war might even be less dangerous than narrative war if you can win a war without firing a shot because you've convinced everyone in another country to think a certain way or to doubt the merit of their cause. And that's what's happening on a daily basis by extremely powerful, well-funded, ruthless enemies.
They just chip away, and they're doing it very effectively. It's time to fight back. David Keyes, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for your brilliance as always. And for those who may not know of your online personality, which is a little bit different to what we just experienced here, which of course was very professional and to the point, but you are hilarious and you know how to go viral. And you know how to get a very strong, important message out to people in a way that is not particularly mainstream, but so effective. So follow David Keyes on X and everywhere else that you can find him. David, thank you so much. Okay, now it's time for fan feedback. And of course, if you are a fan, you can still hate me. If you engage and watch, then it means you fit into that category. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one thing that I'm bringing you right here and now. And there's a reason I'm only bringing you one thing. A, because this show has gone very long, and I love your patience. Thank you for sticking with me. And B, because this is just so out there, so powerful, so terrifying, so depressing that I wanted to give it its own special space. Dr. Gardsard shared something on social media yesterday on X, an interview that I had done with him. And one of the replies on that interview was from someone called Bobby Trump, and it said, "Is that Sydney Sweeney's mum?" Now, initially I was overjoyed because she's smoking hot. And if someone thinks that I might look a little bit like her, that's a compliment, right? She is all woman. And then I realized the mum bit. And no longer am I described, when people compare me to famous celebrities, as being like their sister. I've now moved into that space where I am thought of as the mother of a 20-something-year-old woman. And yes, I want you to focus on my substance, and yes, looks don't matter. And yes, there are bigger issues in the world, but please, God, don't put me in the mum category yet. Please. Auntie. I'd take auntie, begrudgingly. I'd much prefer sister. But if you have to elevate me, I'll do auntie. But please not mum. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all, and I will see you next week. Take care. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll be back to break down all the news, give you all my thoughts on Monday, 6 a.m. ET, and you can work out all the other times. Take care. Bye.